Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto and Sasuke switched roles. When you think about it, Sasuke, we could be standing in each other's place right now. Naruto grows up shunned, hated, without support and full of rage. Sasuke grows up determined to step out of his brother's shadow and be recognized for his own merits. In which Naruto is the one who runs and Sasuke does the chasing. Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard! Chapter 8. Sasuke wants to know what happened to Sakura. Is Shibi married to Kyoko? Makoto couldn't help the light laugh that shook her shoulders. She glanced away from the vegetables she was cutting on the counter to look at her husband, staring off in the distance, mission reports open but forgotten on the table in front of him. What's so funny? I could tell something was bothering you, but really, that was it? He frowned, never one to appreciate being teased. He used to be more fun. Or did he? Maybe she just used to be less so. It may have occurred to me that I know very little of the current, personal affairs of our various associates. The word friends would make his mouth melt, probably. She sighed, both exasperated and fond. It was always funny and mildly unsettling to see that Fugaku, for all his responsibilities and status, could be as immature and petty as a teenager. No, he's not. The Aburame raised their children collectively, and they're light on their attachment to lineage. Shibi and Kyoko's son Shino, he's in Sasuke's class by the way, is next in line for the succession for now, but it's more a question of age and timing than legacy. Maybe it will go to someone else. Ha! Fugaku took a sip of his tea, thoughtful, and Makoto knew to expect more questions. What would he do without her, she wondered. What about Inoichi? He never married either, although he and Ino's mother lived together for a while. They were close friends and he wanted a child, but she wasn't interested in the sedentary lifestyle. She's a traveling spy, she's not often seen in the village. He stopped at Ino, Fugaku said, more as a personal reflection than a question. Makoto answered anyway. Historically, the Yamanaka have had more female leaders than male ones. Their women can pass down the family name as well as the men, and be trained in their techniques. So yeah, he stopped at Ino. It was an issue they had avoided, and she was both glad and guilty about it. She would have loved a daughter equally to her sons, but what about him? The Uchiha were debatably the worst on that particular subject. Fugaku didn't catch the bite in her tone, and not for the first time, she regretted bitterly the years she had spent keeping herself quiet, unwilling to make any noise, to stir any trouble. If he was deaf to her voice today, she had only herself to blame. And could only count on herself to fix it. Is he single then? Not exactly. He has this thing going on with Shikaku and Yoshino. It was always satisfying to hear bewildered silence where an answer should have been. She set her knife down and turned around, not resisting the need to see the expression on his face. What? It's been a few years. Why do you think he's always there when we dine at the Naraz? I just assumed they were close friends. Well, they are. She couldn't say she understood it either, except maybe she did, a little. They had all been quick to marry and have children, because it's what was expected of them, and there was an urgency then that only war could bring, to get on with those things before it was too late. They were older now though, relatively at peace and free from their elders' grasp, for the most part. Willing to live their life as they wanted, at least a little. Ready to fight for it too. She had reconnected with her friends from outside the clan, and it was a bitter comfort to see that they were all struggling with their family life, one way or another. Yoshino had been unhappy for a long time, and for a while her marriage had been on shaky ground. Shikaku was far from a stellar husband, but it's not like he had changed over the years. He had always been this way, she had wrongly assumed he would evolve in her sense. That new arrangement seemed to suit them though. Makoto too had made similar mistakes, to convince herself that the things that upset her in her relationship would ease with time, that she would be content, eventually. How foolish young women could be. You never mentioned any of it to me, he accused. She rolled her eyes. As if she was responsible for keeping him updated on their circle's love lives. Who's the chief of police here? Besides, they don't advertise it, but they're not exactly subtle either. And you can be a bit traditional on those matters. There was no reason for me to bring it up. He grimaced, and he knew that wasn't the word she wanted to use. It was a skill she had mastered over years of navigating political conflicts. The art of being someone insulting without saying anything outright offensive. He could tell she meant a far less neutral term than traditional, so even her not saying it didn't soothe the sting. He loved when she used it on other people. They used to go through boring get-togethers this way, by faking politeness and subtly riling up everyone around them without them being able to pinpoint what made them so infuriating. He didn't like when it was turned against him though. Why are you being like this? Ever since. You've changed, he said. The accusation in his tone would have rushed her into an apology, once upon a time, but a lot had happened since then, and he didn't hold that much authority over her anymore. She did feel bad for him, a bit. In the wave of brutal changes that had crashed over them, it distressed him that he couldn't even hold on to what they were. You're wrong. I changed before, when I married you, and I just chose to let it go. I put so much effort into being more proper, into swallowing down my every word. I thought it was the right thing to do. That I had to focus on being a good mother and a good wife, and leave all the fighting to you, be it on the battlefield or in a council room. And look where it led us. Nothing of what happened was your fault. Of course, it was, Fugaku. It was my fault, and yours, she accused plainly. It was a long time coming, really. They had had to put up a united front, for the sake of the clan and their children, during the abrupt transition brought by Danzo's downfall, but things were settling down now and he needed to understand they were not going back to how they used to be. All the times I failed to stand up to you, all the times you didn't listen to me. We should have seen something, Fugaku. We should have noticed. We were so caught up in that little roleplay, the clan head and his devoted wife and their two perfect children. None of it was any truth. And we are not going back to the way it was. I'm not going to stop. You need to accept that. Despite everything, she still wanted for them to overcome this together, as a team, as a family. They were freer and bolder once when they were young, and she refused to believe it had just gone away. He didn't answer anything, but for him, it was a good sign. It meant he was using his brain, meant he was considering. It was rare that they managed to conclude a conversation in one go. Fugaku was terminally incapable of making a decision on the spot. The front door opened and two pairs of footsteps shuffled into the house, the other reason why their talks were often interrupted before they could meet their end. Itachi and Sasuke tumbled into the kitchen, in good enough spirit it seemed. Itachi caught on the heavy air around his parents immediately, while Sasuke remained oblivious, his only concern being how fast dinner would be ready. I'll help, Itachi offered, already washing his hands and reaching for the remaining vegetables. I'll leave you to it, Fugaku said in turn, rising from his seat. Makoto caught Sasuke sneaking unsettled glances at his father, and tried to draw Fugaku's attention on it, to no avail. Her husband could be so dense, it was unbelievable. Finally, he seemed to catch on, because he turned toward his youngest. Do you want to show me what you've learned, Sasuke? Sasuke, who had been growing angry at himself lately for still chasing after his father's approval, did his best to accept in what he probably believed was a nonchalant way. It worked on Fugaku, so it was all fine. It would most likely end in yet another argument between the two, since Sasuke didn't hesitate now to call his father out on his harshness and lack of interest. Makoto left them to it though, they had to work things out on their own. She found herself alone with Itachi, which wasn't bad either, even if she feared she would yet again fail to reach through to him. Did your training go well? She asked, hoping to at least ease him into small talk. She was desperate for any information he would give her about how he was feeling, how he was doing. Yes. Sasuke is a good student. Was sure sway with you? She felt it immediately. A subtle but unmistakable change in the atmosphere of the room, in Itachi's posture. He put down the knife he was handling and set both of his hands on the counter. Yes. Don't worry, I don't train Sasuke on my own. Her eyes widened and she let go of her own bowl. That's not what I... Why aren't you mad at me? He was facing away from her. His shoulders and back were contracted in a painful-looking line. About what? She asked, although she knew where this was going. You should be mad. You should. You did what you thought was right, Itachi. It's your right to be at odds with the wills of the clan. Even if it means going behind our back. That's not it. She had a feeling it wasn't. Fugaku and Itachi had talked at length, if not about their feelings, at least about their vision, their diverging opinion on right and wrong, on priorities and sacrifices. She wasn't sure they understood each other, but at least Fugaku and her knew what had gone through Itachi's mind, knew the reasoning behind him spying on the clan, reporting their every action. I don't want a war. Itachi had yelled, the first night they had had that conversation. Makoto had never heard him yell before. I don't want a war, he'd said again quietly, and really, that's all there was to it. Itachi was scared of war and would have done anything to prevent it. And in that case, anything, she believed, was an awful lot. I would have done it, he whispered, as much a confession as a realization. I would have done it, Mom. Definitely giving up on dinner making, she marched to him and put gentle hands on his shoulders, making him turn around so that they could face each other. He avoided her gaze, his eyes were shining. He said we'd all be slaughtered anyway, and that others would die in the fights too. He said that that Sasuke would be spared. That way, it would be just me. I would be the one to. No one else would. I was going to do it. He was shaking. She stayed silent, lest she startled him out of his confession. He had never shared those details with them. He really had me believe it was the only way. Itachi didn't say Danzo's name aloud. I believed him. I didn't think about anything else. It wasn't your role to find a solution to this, Itachi. You should never have had to be involved in the first place. But I was. And I. Mom, why aren't you mad? I was going to. I was. You can't know that. I do. I'm sure. I'm. No. The sudden firmness of her tone startled him into silence. He looked young suddenly, far younger than he was, younger than they tended to see him. He looked at her like a kid could look at his mother, when he hoped she could answer his doubts, soothe his worry. You're not. You didn't do it, Itachi. Be it thanks to luck, fate, anything, you didn't do it. We will never know what could have happened. Maybe you would have, yes. Maybe we would have had to stop you. The thought made her sick. She went on. Maybe the others would have changed their mind, maybe someone would have discovered everything, maybe you wouldn't have been able to go through with it. We can never know, so it doesn't matter. You didn't do it, Itachi. We don't blame people for crimes they could have committed. Don't we? Naruto's sullen face flashed through her mind. She inhaled deeply, trying to steady herself. I'm not mad at you. Because I don't want to. It does scare me to know the extremes you could have been pushed to, it does anger and sadden me how close we came to that tragedy. We can only be grateful it didn't come to pass. But it's in who I am now. I can never. I'm that kind of person. I can't escape it. She couldn't deny it. Maybe he was. It didn't help that the following event had proved him and Danzo's wrong. They had managed to solve that conflict another way, if only because the shock of what was going on behind the scene had made the Uchiha realize that they weren't the only ones being wronged in the current situation. Itachi has the proof that his choice wasn't the right one. And that he had been spared from actually making it didn't erase the weight of it from his mind. You'll just have to make amends then. Do better. Make sure nothing of the sort ever happens again. It didn't happen, Itachi. This world doesn't exist. You're here now, with us. We're all here. Her hands were cradling his face. His fingers closed around her wrists, his only concession to their physical distance. I hate myself, he confessed in a breath. It pierced straight through her heart, but she remained steady, unshaken. I know. Unable to stand it anymore, she closed the distance between them and wrapped him in her arm. He was almost taller than her, he folded on himself to hide into her embrace, shoulders shaking with dry sobs. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry. He repeated it again and again, as she answered time and time again, it's all right, it's all right. It wasn't really, but what was she supposed to say? Of course, because Fugaku always had awful timing, it was the moment he chose to come back to the kitchen, Sasuke in tow. It was a testament to how bad Itachi was feeling that he didn't move from her embrace. Fugaku stood shell-shocked, struggling as he usually was with processing any emotions, his or others. Fortunately for all of them, Sasuke seemed to have developed some sensitivity from who knew where. She certainly didn't credit any of his family members for it. What's happening? Is Itachi all right? He asked, face and voice heavy with concern, as he jumped around them to try and spot his brother's face. Itachi straightened up slowly, rubbing a furtive hand on his eyes. I'm okay, Sasuke, don't worry. You know, if you don't want to tell me, you can just tell me that. There's no need to lie. Itachi's expression was comical, and Makoto couldn't stifle her laugh, especially after the loaded conversation they had just finished. I'm not so fine. But I will be, Itachi amended. Sasuke nodded, satisfied. Although, maybe I need some help, Itachi added after a pause, with a meaningful look at his mother. We'll take it up to Inoichi, she answered easily, knowing he would be more comfortable going through the man instead of knocking at the psychology department's door on his own. Itachi liked him, and trusted him marginally more than others of similar rank and position. Fugaku looked like he wanted to ask something, but he didn't, which was commendable. Every time he understood he was in over his head and had best to stand back and keep silent was a win in her book. Can we eat now though? Sasuke asked. She scolded him lightly for his impatience, but he looked pleased with himself, as Itachi had relaxed a little, promising it would be ready soon. Makoto pondered that her youngest was smarter than they gave him credit for. Ino. Can you come out? I want to talk to you. Sasuke tried to play it cool, but the sudden silence of the classroom made him nervous. Why were those idiots looking at him like this? It wasn't that extraordinary that he would need to speak with a fellow classmate. Several girls giggled and whispered to themselves, but Ino silenced them with a scalding look. Sasuke was a little jealous, his still needed some work. She got up from her desk gracefully, looking supremely unconcerned and like she was doing him a huge favor by accepting. Lead the way, she said haughtily. Sasuke fought to keep an eye roll in check. He needed her cooperation. They had just a few minutes between classes, so most of the students had stayed put. The corridor was empty. They walked a few steps away from the door, if only to escape wandering eyes and ears. Now that he was facing with her, Sasuke grew nervous again. He didn't like to expose himself like that, didn't want to know what conclusion she would draw about him. It was worse because it was Ino, who he always felt had mind-reading abilities or something, and who was also the worst gossip, and not in a harmless everyone must know what I know way. More in a I weaponize knowledge and won't hesitate to blackmail you way. But surely, she would know, so. Alright, she said in a bored tone just as he was opening his mouth. I'll go out with you. He abruptly closed it. What the hell was she talking about? He fought off an embarrassed flush and, panicking, he blurted out the first thing that situation inspired him. No thanks. Her expression of careful disinterest slipping into incredulous surprise clued him into thinking that wasn't the right thing to say. I mean, that's not what I meant to ask. Oh. She quickly composed back her haughty posture, and the flash of hurt he thought he saw on her face immediately morphed into anger. Are you serious? Why would you call me outside like that then? To ask you something else. What's your problem really? What's my? Forget about it. Sage, boys are so stupid. She raised a commanding hand to prevent him from answering to that. He hid a grimace into his collar, she was so damn rude. What do you want then? Sasuke hesitated. The conversation was off to a rocky start, it didn't bode well for his chances to get an answer. But now that they had gone through that terribly embarrassing endeavor, he wasn't going to back out without getting what he actually wanted. It's about Sakura. She grimaced. If you want me to ask her out for you. Will you stop it? I'm not asking anybody out, damn it. The outburst startled her and she lost a bit of her reserve. She crossed her arms on her chest, going almost businesslike in her expression, and gestured with her chin for him to go on. I figured maybe you knew. About what happened to her. He made a vague gesture toward his right cheek. Her posture changed entirely once she understood what he was talking about, and she hunched a little, defensive. I do. He hoped his annoyance didn't show on his face. Was he the only one who had no clue? Would you tell me? No way. In insight, he should have seen this coming. Why? If you don't know, it's because she doesn't want you to, and I'm not going to step over that. If you really want to know, just ask her. I have. Have you? Had he? Maybe not is so many words. She was skittish around the subject and he couldn't just ask. Could he? He didn't know why he couldn't let it go. He had been thinking more and more about it lately, maybe because he had too much alone time on his hand. It was getting difficult to get a hold on both Naruto and Sakura these days. Sakura, because she was mending things with Ino, Sasuke supposed so anyway, because Ino's particular brand of friendship eluded him if he was honest. And Naruto because he stayed at the academy after school to train his calligraphy with that Sai guy. Sasuke had spied on them once, and it had been the most boring thing ever. They had barely exchanged a word, focused on their brush dancing on the scrolls, with Sai occasionally nodding and Naruto looking up to copy him. They were probably enjoying themselves, stupidly enough. During training itself, now that Naruto was slowly but surely getting the hang of the academy standard ninjutsu, he spent a lot of time buried in his Fuinjutsu scrolls. Sakura had called it right, not only was he a natural, most importantly, he actually enjoyed it. Maybe more than taijutsu. Sasuke was making his own legwork diving into the signature jutsu of his clans, and he had to admit he also missed their shared training sessions more and more. But Itachi was in the mood lately and Sasuke wanted to make the most of it before he became distant again for whatever reason. He could call it what it was, he missed their little get-togethers, and he couldn't help but feel like, if there was ever a choice to make, Sakura and Naruto would keep hanging out together, and leave him behind. After all, he was the only one who didn't know. Good talk, Ino said, biting, cutting through his wandering thoughts. Sasuke followed her back in the classroom, where she yet again cut all gossip with a searing glare. Sasuke was reluctantly impressed. Ino had warned her that he would probably ask. Sakura was still unprepared. Why? Why do you want to know? They were on cleanup duty for the day, so Sasuke had seized the opportunity. She kept her eyes firmly trained on the chalkboard she was wiping up, tracking his movements by sound as he moved around the classroom to collect the trash. The others do, he said petulantly. I didn't tell them. Naruto was there and Ino knows things. She had no better way to put it. Maybe she had overheard Kara or an adult talk about it. Maybe she had just happened to be snooping around at that moment, be it in the street or at the hospital. Sakura hoped it wasn't that, hoped Ino hadn't seen, and done nothing. I don't want to talk about it, she said weakly. It was a half-lie. The main issue here was that she didn't want to talk about it with him. I just want to know. But why? Why does it matter? It's done now. I'm over it. Another lie, and a transparent one at that. She didn't have to turn around to feel his skeptical look on her. She resisted the urge to touch her scar. Her hair wasn't growing back. She had gone to Ino's house the previous weekend and asked her to cut them into something resembling an intentional cut. She couldn't see herself asking her mother to cut it or to take her to the hairdresser. She didn't think she would understand, her who had been telling her daughter for months now that she wasn't to worry, that they would grow back in no time. She didn't want them to. They would stay gone. Naruto had said she looked like Uchiha Shursui. It's true they had the same haircut, sort of. Well, there was worse look-alike to have. Everyone was attractive in the Uchiha clan. It's stupid, Sasuke mumbled. What? She asked, defensive. What is so surprising that she wanted to keep it to herself? But he didn't get the harshness of her tone, because he wasn't talking about her. It's stupid, but I want to know who it was. So that I don't become friend with them. Sakura stopped wiping the board. She made great efforts to turn around and look at the boy. He was still tossing pieces of paper and candy wrapping into the bin, carefully avoiding to have her in his line of sight. This was one of the sweetest things anyone had ever said to her. She never felt like he particularly cared about her presence. He wasn't as hostile as he had been at first, but it's not like they had grown close or anything. Well, it wasn't it? Except she would have been hard-pressed to say what it looked like when he did care about someone, save from the few interactions she had seen him have with his family. He wasn't very demonstrative, and he didn't have that many friends. Naruto and her, namely. They were friends. If they were friends, maybe she could tell him and he wouldn't be mad at her. She had the sudden urge to find out what he would say, to put it to the test. She felt the echo of the warm feeling that used to fill her when she looked at him and talked to him. She knew him better now than she ever did back then, and he had done nothing that justified she should love him less. All right. She had never retold the event in so many words before. It was unpleasant, but it was also cathartic. It was long enough ago that she felt a little detached from it, mainly because she was confident it wouldn't happen again now. On their last taijutsu lesson she had requested to be paired up with Kara, and she had nailed her to the ground in less than a minute. Kara had tried and tried, but she had barely landed any punches, and the ones that landed were weak, they couldn't hurt her. Kara had nothing on Naruto, or even Sasuke. And now Kara had nothing on her either. She spoke and she watched Sasuke's face change, going from curious to confused to a blank expression she couldn't decipher. She was playing idly with the sponge to occupy her hand. He was completely still, standing a few feet away between the tables, the setting sun playing ominous shadows on his face and body, on the room around them. When she was done, she felt tired and spent, but content too. It was out there now. From then on, it wouldn't be so hard to talk about this. He stayed silent for a terribly long, unnerving moment, enough that she considered running out of the classroom, confident that he wouldn't react fast enough to catch her. He spoke just when she was starting to stretch her legs. That's terrible. She could have laughed at his tone, awkward and emotionless, had he been trying to empathize with anyone else. As it was, she didn't really feel like laughing. That's just, yeah. She couldn't find anything more to say. In the end, they didn't say anything at all. They wrapped up and left the academy without adding a single word, not even a goodbye, and the good feeling she had had about this vanished as she raced home to go cry in her pillow. Dad! What is it, Sasuke? What's happening? Are you hurt? What's going on? We need to talk right now. Was it not for her mother's tone of voice, Sakura would have probably ignored her call to come downstairs immediately. She wasn't nearly done sulking for the night, as she kept coming up with scenarios more terrible than the other as to what Sasuke was up to right now.
Maybe he was never going to talk to her again. Maybe he was going to tell everyone so that they could mock her.
Maybe he was going to have her arrested for dragging the Uchiha name in the dirt. She knew she wasn't making a lot of sense, but she had no control over her senseless fear.
Why hadn't he said something? Why hadn't she asked?
The panic she could hear in her mother's scream, that strangely echoed her own, pushed her to get out of her bed and drag herself downstairs where the front door was open. She had just heard the bell ring. Maybe it was a visitor for her? The police, here to take her out? She climbed down the stairs and for a split second her heart stopped, because it was the police. Specifically, it was Sasuke's father. Sasuke was there too, along with another couple of Uchiha she didn't recognize. And Kara. It was too late to turn back. She was tempted to anyway. Hi. Hello. Hi. Uchiha Fugaku was a stern-looking man who had reverse dimple under his mouth, caused by non-smiling she imagined. He wasn't in his uniform but in a traditional kimono, as were the two other adults that Sakura could only assume were Kara's parents. What was happening? Her mother seemed at least as freaked out as she was, while the Uchiha party was perfectly composed, serious expression on their serious face. Sasuke didn't look at her, emulating his father's solemnity. She wished he would clue her in as to what was going on. Hello, Sakura. I'm Sasuke's father, but I'm here as the head of the Uchiha clan, the man said, nodding at Sakura before quickly going back to addressing her mother, who was not so subtly gripping the doorframe for support. It has come to my attention that your daughter has suffered a great offense from one of our children. He gestured at Kara without looking at her. Sakura had never seen her looking so down and self-conscious, head hanging low and shoulders hunched. She barely raised her head to cast a panicked look around her before staring back at her shoes. Yes? Sakura's mother said weakly. Her father wasn't home to provide moral support, and Sakura wasn't going to be much help either. I don't know how that event was handled exactly, the man continued, unaware of the trouble he was causing or choosing to ignore it, but from what Kara told us, the fault lies entirely on her and her friends. We don't condone that kind of behavior in any way, and they will be severely punished. In the meantime, we hope you will accept our much sincere apologies, even if we're aware of how late they are, and how little they weigh in light of what happened. Sakura was still in the process of putting that sentence back into the right order when all five of the Uchiha standing at her doorstep bowed, in sync and all. Her mother blushed furiously, losing what little composure she had left, as she tried to get them to stand back up. When it looked like it wasn't happening though, she turned toward Sakura, as if her daughter was going to be any help. Her gaze though, as it often did, fell onto her right cheek. She took a few deep breaths and stood a little straighter, facing the party with renewed dignity. She gave a small bow of her own. We're grateful for you coming here today. Another furtive look at Sakura. She gave the smallest nod. We accept your apology. That thankfully made them straighten up. Please believe that we take this kind of matter very seriously. Don't hesitate to reach out to us in the future. Thank you for your time. And with that, they were finally gone. Barely a minute later, as Sakura and her mother were still standing dumbfounded in the entryway, Sakura's father came rushing through the door. Was that Uchiha Fugaku I just saw exit our house? Her mother burst into hysterical laughter. Fugaku stared at the red spiral tapped to the door for an absurdly long time. Naruto had worked it into his clothes too. Fugaku had no idea what the boy thought his connection was to the design, and he didn't know why he was so hung up on that insignificant detail. But here it was, that red spiral, coincidentally marking the territory of the last remaining member of the Uzumaki clan. It was the first time Fugaku came near it, although he had known where the Jinchuriki lived from the start, of course. In a building exclusively inhabited with shinobi. In a flat on his own. He had knowledge of this, but he had never given it a single thought until now. He had never even addressed the boy. Why did it matter all of the sudden? He knocked on the door. There was some shuffling on the other side and the sound of the lock turning, but the door opened just a smidge, blue eyes peering through the crack, widening when they saw him. They had never met, but the boy obviously knew who he was.
"What do you want?" he said, aggression failing to cover his wariness. "I just need to talk to you."
"You're not in trouble," Fugaku added as an afterthought. There was a long pause before the boy finally decided to open the door enough that Fugaku could see him in full, just enough though, that his body filled the open space, blocking the entry. It was somewhat hard to remember that Naruto was the same age as Sasuke, even a little younger. His face was set in a hard scowl, eyes full of mistrust and simmering rage. He was tensed as a bowstring, ready to lash out. Fugaku had planned to put in a little formality, but he found it wiser to just cut through the heart of the matter, lest he wanted to see the door being closed in his face. "You were wrongly accused of harming Haruno Sakura," he said bluntly, and got the small satisfaction of seeing surprise open a crack in the boy's guarded-up demeanor. He recovered quickly though. "And what of it?" It was Fugaku's turn to be caught off guard. What of it indeed? Sasuke had insisted that his friend got excuses too. Fugaku had been more concerned with the fact that all parties involved in that incident had been convinced that the Uchiha would side with the guilty no question asked because she was one of their own. It was exactly the reputation they were trying to shake off. But he cared very little about what the Jinchuriki thought of his clan. Sasuke didn't though. Fugaku was surprised at the boy's strong sense of justice. His outrage had been real, and would have been just as strong, Fugaku was sure, had the people involved not been his friends. Naruto hadn't been punished, since the teacher that had handled the affair was seemingly well aware that he wasn't actually responsible, something else they would have to look into. That Mizuki had very little going for him, according to Sasuke's report. But as it was, Naruto being wronged in the matter had little to do with them, and of little consequences. Sasuke had still insisted that Fugaku apologize to him also. Fugaku couldn't deny he was curious about the boy, curious enough that he had agreed. "You shouldn't have been. On behalf of my clan, I'm sorry you took the fall for Uchiha Kara." The boy shrugged, indifferent. Fugaku felt his temper rise. "You could have said something," he added, determined to engage with him somehow. "To who?" Naruto shot back immediately. "To us, for a start." "Yeah, right," the boy scoffed. Fugaku had about zero experience with badly raised children, and had to make great effort to keep his temper in check. He raised a hand to rack it through his hair, a tick betraying his thinning patience that he had never managed to get rid of. He froze mid-gesture though when the boy tensed suddenly, taking a slight step back to fall into a defensive position. It crossed his face only for a second, Fugaku still saw it clearly. The boy was afraid of him. The boy was afraid of him, there was no going around it. Fugaku wondered in what respect. Because he was an Uchiha? The chief of police? A stranger? An adult? Was he afraid he would get mad, yell, hit him? Whichever it was, the fact remained. The Jinchuriki of the nine-tailed fox, the host of one of the most dangerous beasts of their world, that tiny receptacle of evil and chaos, was afraid of him. The boy fought against himself to appear more relaxed, likely upset at having revealed himself like this. "Will that be all, sir?" he asked, failing to sound as detached as he was aiming for, eager for this conversation to be over. To escape Fugaku and his gaze, to retreat to the safety of his apartment. "He's a boy," Makoto kept repeating when they were arguing about this. "He's just a boy." Staring at him, Fugaku, for the first time, understood what she was saying. He had been thinking that Sasuke and the other kids didn't see Naruto in that light simply because they didn't know the truth. But Itachi, Shisui, even Izumi, they did know, and they still talked about him as a bratty, insufferable kid. As just a boy. "Why do you treat him like this?" Sasuke had asked angrily when Fugaku had dared to suggest there was no need to make things right by him. "He's done nothing wrong." Did Naruto perceive his animosity, even though they had never met? Did he just live on the assumption that the people he met wished him no good? Because despite it being their first meeting, just as Naruto was afraid of Fugaku, Fugaku was afraid of Naruto. Afraid of the power he could unleash, the destruction he could cause, afraid of what getting close to him in any way could bring upon his family and clan. But his first instinct upon seeing the boy flinched away from him had been to think, why are you afraid? You have no reason to. Didn't he, though? Fugaku had heard, in passing, that the boy had been treated unfairly before. He dismissed it for more pressing concern, assuming that those claims were likely exaggerated. The Haruno family had been wary too. They'd seen Fugaku as a threat, they'd been scared of what he was going to do. It was an unpleasant feeling, to be feared when he shouldn't have been. A feeling Naruto had to be very familiar with. Did he also think when people flinched away from him, why are you afraid? You have no reason to. He's done nothing wrong. He really hadn't. And yet. Yes, that is all. The ones at fault will receive punishment. Great. Thanks or whatever. Goodbye. As the door swung shut, Fugaku was seized by the absurd need to stop it, to reach out to the boy and make him understand that he was being sincere, that what had happened was wrong, that he shouldn't have been put through this. He didn't though. He turned away and left. Why be so concerned about this all of the sudden? Maybe because of Itachi. Of the leniency his boy had received from other, leniency he wasn't able to grant to himself. Him and the countless kids victim of Danzo's schemes, no one was thinking about blaming them for their crimes. They were just kids. It would be a simple matter, he pondered on his way home, to task the shinobi of the police force patrolling the streets with the additional mission of keeping an eye out for the boy, to ensure that he wasn't treated unfairly. It should have been a given, probably, but stating it plainly wouldn't hurt. They were meant to protect all in the village. No exceptions. Sakura? Can I come in? Sakura grunted an assessment and her mother opened her bedroom door with cautious care. At least now she actually waited for her to say yes before barging in. Sakura stood up from where she lied spread up on her bed, staring at the ceiling as she thought back on the very weird day she had just had. How are you feeling? Her mother still had that same air of concern about her, that she had just after Sakura had been hurt. She wished she would have snapped out of it by now, because Sakura was fine, or trying to be, and this wasn't helping. I'm okay. Her mother narrowed her eyes, trying to spot the lie. There wasn't any though, not this time. She was okay, for real. Not so much, because she had gotten an apology, although it was nice. Not even to have discovered that the Uchiha clan wasn't as selfish as they were portrayed to be, not all of them anyway. But Sasuke. She had told him her story, and the first thing he had done was to seek justice for her. She couldn't say she was all too happy about the way he had gone about it. It's not like she had asked him to keep to himself, it was only implied. She could only hope he wasn't the one who had suggested that ambush at her house. That part of the Uchiha's reputation wasn't a lie it seemed, they did have a flair for the dramatic and a love of formalities. She had been worrying about nothing. She actually felt a little guilty about it, she had pictured him in the worst possible light, and he had gone the exact opposite way. He had rushed home and spilled to the head of his clan himself. Granted, it was his own father, but still. He had not hesitated for a second. Did you want something? Sakura asked after the silence had stretched enough to feel stilted and awkward. I guess I wanted to apologize too. She sat down on the bed so that they were eye to eye, but she didn't look at Sakura directly. Your father and I. We're sorry. About how we went about this. Mom. You were right to be angry at us. And I realize it's kind of hypocritical to say that only now that we know for sure we could have said something sooner. But still, we did the wrong choice. And we're sorry. They hadn't they? And yes, now they knew for sure that there was no use to make nice with her bullies just because they were Uchihas, that they should have spoken up from the start. It was satisfying, in a way. But not as much as she thought it would be. Okay, she said, for lack of better words.
Her mother left it at it. The next day, Sakura marched to Sasuke right there in the middle of the classroom, under all their classmates' eyes. That was embarrassing for everyone involved, she said. But... thank you. I mean it.
You're welcome, he answered, relaxing a little, and she smiled at the thought that he might have been a bit worried about her reaction. She meant to retell the events to Naruto, but he didn't show up at all.
Sasuke.
That was all the warning Sasuke got before being tackled to the ground by an enraged Naruto. He got back on his feet quickly, only to block in extremis several kicks and punches in quick succession.
What the hell, Naruto? I'm gonna have your head, you bastard.
Naruto wasn't at school the whole day and Sasuke had come to the training ground fully expecting to train on his own.
It looked like Naruto had other ideas. He kept attacking, with more force and intent than he'd ever had.
Sasuke barely registered Sakura arriving at the training ground and shouting in alarm, immediately picking up that something was wrong. Don't you ever, Naruto growled, his fist flying towards Sasuke's face, who blocked it with both hands, ever send adults to my door again?
That's what this is about? Sasuke exclaimed, trying for a kick.
Naruto freed his fist from his grip to jump backward, his feet barely touching the ground before he jumped again to avoid Sasuke's sweeping foot. Naruto fell back right on top of him, Sasuke blocked and pushed him back, but Naruto was already charging again.
What the hell were you thinking? Why did you do that?
Naruto's fury, far from distracting him, fueled his aggressiveness and fighting prowess. Sasuke was losing ground, unwilling, to get as serious as Naruto was.
I just wanted to. I wanted to help. It shouldn't have happened this way. You shouldn't have. I don't need your help. I don't want it.
He'd known there was a possibility that Naruto wouldn't like it, but it didn't matter.
Sasuke hadn't reported back what Sakura had told him to his father just out of vindication or righteous anger.
No one could escape consequences and judgment, and injustice had to be corrected, the truth had to be out. Sakura had implied, even if she had been unwilling to get into the details, that they had said nothing and left the story as it was because they didn't believe anyone would care, or worse, that it would ultimately turn against them.
And that was wrong. His father was always saying they had to honor the Uchiha name, and that was the way to do it. I did what I had to do. What's your problem anyway? What happened that was so terrible? Had his father said something?
He'd insisted on going alone, and Sasuke knew his father wasn't exactly fond of Naruto.
The other boy didn't answer.
He was still just as aggressive while Sasuke was getting tired of this meaningless fight.
Couldn't they just talk like normal people?
Besides, he really didn't appreciate Naruto slowly taking the upper hand.
Putting several steps between them, Sasuke's hands went through familiar mudras as he collected chakra in his chest.
Naruto would know to keep away from it, but the fire would hopefully snap him out of his fury.
Katan. Fireball jutsu.
He blew through his looped fingers as hard as he could. His training was paying off, his range and firepower had improved greatly. So much, in fact, that he worried for a second that Naruto wouldn't be able to get out of the way fast enough after all.
Except something very different happened.
The fireball shrunk suddenly, like it was being inhaled. Sasuke watched with utter disbelief as it kept getting smaller and smaller, until it was gone entirely. On the other side stood Naruto, scroll opened in front of him.
Sasuke recognized the chakra storing seal drawn on the paper.
In the center of the circle appeared the fire kanji in blood-red ink.
Silence fell onto the training ground. Naruto looked at the scroll, at least as surprised as Sasuke about this turn of event.
Then, slowly, a smug grin spread over his face, and it's with confidence and disdain that he looked up at Sasuke, still frozen a few meters away. "Keep your family away from me," he spat out. The next moment, he was gone.
Sakura and Sasuke were left alone at the training ground, staring after him.
"What use is storing chakra if you can't use it again?" he'd asked Naruto like an idiot, annoyed at seeing him draw drawing that stupid seal again and again and being unable to divert his attention from it. Naruto hadn't answered, but of course he'd find something.
Crafty didn't begin to describe how resourceful Naruto could be.
Another reason why sealing, an arc requiring improvisation and creation, suited him so well.
He's gotten better, Sakura stated uselessly. Sasuke didn't bother answering.
He was busy trying to rein in on his raging emotions, split between wanting to run after Naruto, to punch something, to lie down on the floor and not get back up, and to scream to the top of his lung.
He did nothing. Izumi had joined Sasuke's last training sessions with his brother and cousin, and she'd asked, "Why does it matter so much to you?"
He tried to explain it to them, but he wasn't even sure about it himself. Why did it matter so much that Naruto stayed focused on him, that Sasuke remained within his reach? There were other kids his age that could have been his rival, that he could have wanted to fight and beat, but Sasuke didn't care about the others.
Naruto was special.
Naruto had chosen him without any care about his family name, his brother, or his reputation, just moved by the desire to beat him specifically.
Naruto was the first, and Sasuke didn't need another one. Besides, there was a fear, spread out through his mind and hovering over their every interaction, that if Sasuke let go, just the slightest, Naruto would slip through his fingers and vanish into thin air. He wouldn't let that happen.
"He'll be back," he said, showing more confidence than he really felt.
"Let's train, Sakura."
She nodded, solemn, and maybe she understood, Sasuke thought. Maybe she felt too that they had to get stronger if they wanted to hold on to him.
Chapter 9. There is something in Sasuke's eyes.
Sasuke barged into his house and stomped his way straight to his bedroom. It was in that kind of moments he regretted they lived in a traditional house, having to unroll the futon before face planting into it took a lot out of the dramatic effect. He buried his face in his pillow and held his breath for a moment, trying to calm himself down. Sparring with Sakura had done very little to rid himself of his pent-up frustration, even if she really was getting good at this. They'd lingered longer than usual, but Naruto hadn't come back. He was just so
maddening. Sasuke didn't get him at all.
It didn't help that it was impossible to have a straightforward conversation with him.
He was so damn infuriating. That was it.
Next time they saw each other, Sasuke would corner him and wouldn't let him go until he knew exactly what was going on with him. It was easier said than done though, because Naruto became very hard to catch in the following days. He barely showed up to class and didn't come to the training ground. Sakura had no more luck than Sasuke at getting a hold on him.
Sasuke was getting restless and increasingly annoyed, unable to focus on anything else than that idiot and his crazy avoidance techniques. Naruto couldn't stay mad forever, right? He couldn't just stop being there. He wasn't stronger than Sasuke yet. He couldn't just walk away.
Stuck on those thoughts looping in his brain, when Sasuke spotted Naruto in the academy courtyard, ready to disappear as he always did, all his focus turned toward not letting that happen at any cost. Shursui had been teaching him the basics of the body flicker.
Sasuke's range was laughable and he wasn't nearly fast enough yet to trick anyone in combat.
He was, however, fast enough to land in Naruto's face before he got a chance to make a run for it. His surprise was worth the wave of nausea that hit Sasuke full force. Today wasn't the day he would be able to use the technique more than once. There were a number of things Sasuke wanted to say to the other boy, but as usual, once he was there, they all deserted him.
He could only remember one. "Fight me."
Naruto's face scrunched up into an angry scowl, but Sasuke knew he wouldn't back out from the challenge. He surely wanted to, but he wouldn't.
Naruto knew how to rile him up alright, but Sasuke could give just as good as he got. "Fight me, loser." "I'm gonna kick your ass," Naruto bit back. They would see about that.
They made their way to their training ground, casting dirty looks at each other.
Sasuke had trouble remembering what they were supposed to fight about and why he was so angry. He found it didn't matter now. If they fought, he would win, and then he would feel better. The memory of the sealing scroll was fresh in his mind, and he tried to subtly assess the other boy. There were a number of places he could hide scrolls on his body, his weapon pouch,
the large pocket of his short-sleeved hoodie, under said hoodie too, front or back, in his shorts. In theory, he could cancel dozens of ninjutsu that way. Had he not been a victim of that technique, Sasuke would have been excited about it. He would just have to be clever about it. He was faster than Naruto, even if Naruto had better instinct and spatial awareness. They would see which one could surprise the other. It didn't matter either way, because Sasuke couldn't lose. He didn't know why he was overcome by the confused certitude that if he lost today, he would lose Naruto for good. Naruto was always looking for an excuse to back out of their friendship, to put his distance between them. Sasuke wasn't about to let that happen. The training ground was deserted as always. Lost as it was in the woods, far away from the village's noise and agitation, it was easy to believe they were alone in the world, that it was only the two of them. Sasuke fell into position, Naruto did the same. His face was set in grim determination and intense focus. This was real. A real fight with real stakes. Sasuke couldn't help but feel excited. They jumped at the same time. Kunais clashed between them. Sasuke ducked, throwing Naruto off balance and trying to kick his legs from under him. Naruto used his momentum to keep going forward though, and he jumped over Sasuke, landing with a roll. They were immediately back at each other's throats, and it occurred to Sasuke, very briefly, that they could get hurt for real this time. The thought was fleeting, chases away by the next ones, dodge, block, stop a blade with his own. He blocked a kick with both arms crossed in front of his chest but couldn't keep the force of it from sending him several steps back. He jumped up, landing on a sturdy branch in one of the trees lining the training field. Naruto was closing in already. Sasuke threw a handful of shuriken that were sure to distract them. His vision's accuracy wasn't that great, or he was just bad at interceptions. Either way, it gave Sasuke enough time to go through his Madara. Katan. Fireball Jutsu. Surprised, Naruto didn't have time to put out a scroll and had to jump back to avoid the roaring fire. Sasuke took the opportunity to go back to the ground and, rounding the fireball Naruto was still focused on, he managed to catch him from his side before he got noticed. Naruto flew back from the kick to his side, crashing painfully on the ground. Sasuke kept moving forward, to press his advantage and get a few punches in. He drew his arm back, aiming for Naruto's face, still kneeling on the ground. Naruto moved, but not to block, to unroll the scroll he had in hand. He caught Sasuke's fist with it. Sasuke didn't have time to see what was on it, but it became clear enough when he felt some of his chakra being pulled out of him, vanishing in the paper. Fuinjutsu, vacuum seal, Naruto said with a grin. Sasuke rolled his eyes. What a stupid pun. He swung his other fist. Naruto blocked it easily, but it made him let go of the scroll, freeing Sasuke, who jumped back, assessing. He wasn't that depleted because the seal wasn't that big yet, but the change was still noticeable in him. What a terrible technique, he thought, watching Naruto carefully store the scroll in his pouch. How many more did he have? Sasuke kept his distance for a while, focusing on throwing blades and ninjutsu. He had the advantage from a distance since Naruto was good at neither of those. He managed to catch a couple of fireball in his scrolls, but one caught him off guard, carving a nasty burn on the exposed skin of his arm. He didn't cry out though, barely reacted. Somehow, he was getting faster and sharper, and Sasuke felt the weight of his intense focus on it, heavy and unpleasant. Sick of getting attacked from afar, Naruto took it upon himself to close the distance Sasuke was trying to maintain between them. He was reckless and Sasuke hesitated more than once, feeling that Naruto had no intention to dodge or back off. A kunai embedded itself into his shoulder. He didn't stop running towards Sasuke, bent in half and baring his teeth, and slammed into him full force. He ended up straddling Sasuke. He bypassed kunais for his bare fist. He wasn't holding back at all. Blood flooded Sasuke's mouth and he wondered then, for the first time, if Naruto really wanted to hurt him. He thought he saw a flicker of red in the blue of his friend's eyes. As a last resort, he waited for Naruto to draw his arm back again and heaved himself up, slamming their forehead together. The aim was off, He had probably hurt himself just as much as Naruto, but at least it made the other boy loosen a bit and Sasuke could get out of his grip and disappear behind a tree. He used the short respite to catch his breath and shake off his dizziness. Naruto didn't come after him, he wasn't moving, standing in the middle of the training field, looking like he, too, was gathering his thoughts. Sasuke got out of his hiding spot and marched back toward him. Naruto didn't attack. He was staring and Sasuke couldn't for the life of him decipher his expression, figure out what was going on inside his head. Sasuke fell back into position. Naruto did the same. It wasn't over yet. Sasuke was getting tired though, physically, but also tired of the fight in general. It wasn't doing them any good. Instead of calming down, Naruto was getting increasingly worked up and aggressive, and Sasuke didn't appreciate the fight in the slightest, now that he felt Naruto was trying to hurt him, just like he was trying to hurt Naruto. It wasn't what he wanted, it wasn't supposed to be about that. He wanted to stop the fight. Easier said than done though, with Naruto. Getting tired, Saz? Naruto taunted. Sasuke had no illusion that between the two of them Naruto would never be the one to tire out first. He had ripped out the kunai from his shoulder, to throw it back in Sasuke's face, and it was barely hindering his movement. Sasuke was split between being impressed and horrified. They had reverted back to mostly taijutsu. Well, Sasuke had, and Naruto didn't have much more in terms of offensive move. Sasuke couldn't just call out the fight. He had to win if he wanted it to stop, but how? I don't want to lose. I don't want to lose him. I need to be stronger. Another hit dodged, another blocked, another landing in his stomach. He used the momentum to back down, Naruto chasing after him, relentless, merciless. Stronger. Stronger. I need more power. I need to win. He wasn't fast enough to see them all coming. Naruto wasn't either, but Naruto had a far higher pain tolerance and resistance to injury. Sasuke had seen him walk off hits that would have laid most people down. He didn't want to lose. He didn't want Naruto to have an excuse to leave him behind. I need to win. I need to win. I need to win. His thoughts didn't have time to fully form before they were chased away by the next, as he fought back more on instinct than anything. He was past the pain in his muscles and limbs, past strategizing, past thinking altogether. Kick, punch, duck, dodge, block, hit. Find the opening, find the crack, push back. His mind was going into overdrive. I need to win. I need to win. I need to win. I need to win. I need to. Suddenly, Naruto slowed down. His movements became slightly more sluggish, less random. Predictable. Sasuke blocked the next hit easily, and the next one too, seeing with perfect clarity where it was aiming for. He saw an opening in Naruto's guard, he saw that the way he was gearing up for his next move would left it wide open. He kicked him in the chest, hard. Naruto hit the ground and rolled back a few meters. He sat down before Sasuke could even worry about him, but he didn't get back up. Sasuke was distracted by the sharpness of his movements, the colors of his clothes and face and of the ground below him and the leaves behind him, all the things he could see. There was something in his eyes. Apart from a building ache just behind his eyeballs, there was something. It hit him like a ton of brick. His eyes. Naruto was still sitting on the ground, looking bitter. There was nothing friendly in his smile or voice when he talked next. I guess that makes you a real Uchiha then, Saz. Sasuke had just awakened his Sharingan. He went home in a daze. Naruto had run away, again, but Sasuke had a hard time focusing on that for now, busy as he was looking at his hands like he had never seen them before. In a way, he hadn't. His Sharingan was still active. It was a little silly, but he didn't want to switch it off, in case he couldn't call it back once he was home. He wanted to make sure he could show it to his family. He walked with his head down, not really wanting to draw attention on him before he was back to the Uchiha district.
Just his hands were more than enough wonderment anyway. It was like he had imagined it, except it wasn't at all. It had been described to him often. Sasuke didn't count the number of times he had asked a long-suffering Itachi to walk him through it, to tell him again what it was like to see the world through the Sharingan. At first, it could almost feel like nothing was different. The world was the same, but it was also more. It was sharper and brighter, more in focus, wider and clearer, more vivid. He wriggled his fingers and he could see the muscles at play, the skin stretching and folding, and around them he could see the air move, disturbed, see himself move through it, interact with the world around him. It was awesome. A little scary too, if he was being honest, which was the reason why he was hurrying home, eager to be safe behind closed door to explore his newfound ability in peace. The slightest movement kept catching his eyes, the rustling of leaves, a curtain waving around in the evening air. The people passing him by on the street seemed both absurdly agitated and weirdly sluggish, almost twitching. He had to fight the urge to stare after them. His pain and injuries were forgotten already. He would ache all over the next day and need to meditate some to build back his chakra reserve, but those thoughts were so distant they could as well have been out of his brain. What about pain? What about damages? He had the Sharingan. After what felt like a small eternity, he finally passed the door to his house. His mother was fresh back from the day's training with her team, taking off her flak jacket and headband in the entryway. She greeted him absent-mindedly, without looking. He felt silly, waiting like an idiot on the doorstep for her to look at him. "Huh, Mom? What is it? Do you?" "Oh." It was easy to spot when she finally noticed. "Oh my. Sasuke. You? Sasuke." He had about zero time to brace himself before she was burying him into a hug. "Congratulations, honey. What happened, tell me." "Wait, no, don't, save it for when your father and brother." "Fugaku? Fugaku." Sasuke could only stare in confusion and mild awe at his mother waving around wildly, both because the world still had that strange halting quality to it, and because he couldn't remember ever seeing her so expressive in her joy and excitement. Footsteps thundered around the house and his father appeared at the end of the corridor, having mistaken said excitement for fear, judging by his panicked expression. "What is it? What's going on?" His mother turning up her hands in Sasuke's direction was all the answer he got. Sasuke fought not to look down, it would defeat the purpose entirely. He endured his father's stare for an unervingly long time before the man finally noticed what he was supposed to. If seeing his mother fret over him was jarring enough, the startled smile that took over his father's face was downright scary. "This is, congratulations, Sasuke. This is great news." Sasuke lost the battle against his rising blush, feeling it overtake his whole face, and against the urge to look down at his feet. As it was, he didn't notice his father had come closer, until his own feet entered his field of vision. "Look at me, Sasuke." He obeyed, and his newly awakened Sharingan plunged into the much older and trained one of his father. Strong hands came to cup his face, the touch assessing but gentle too, as it titled his head upward. Sasuke had seen the Sharingan before, of course, but it was nothing like what he was seeing now. It was deep, going on, and on the further Sasuke looked, an entire universe laying there between their eyes, like two mirrors set in front of each other. Just as he was getting dizzy from vertigo, his father blinked, and the red was gone. He was smiling. "I'm proud of you, Sasuke." Sasuke looked sideways this time, blinking furiously. The front door opened in his back, a good enough distraction. His head was starting to hurt quite badly, but he didn't want it to stop yet. His eyes fell on Itachi's tired face. They stared at each other as surprise cracked Itachi's solemn expression. Before he could say a word though, Shursui and Izumi appeared in his back with similar squeals of glee. "Baby cousin. You're finally all grown up." At least those reactions were easier to deal with. Sasuke bore with a lot of grumbling, Shursui ruffling his hair roughly and Izumi hugging him hard, smacking a kiss on his cheek that had him redden even more. He couldn't help turning back to Itachi though,
as they started talking excitedly with his mother. His movement was aborted by Itachi poking his forehead. Before he could protest though, Itachi's hand landed gently on his head. "Congratulations, Sasuke." He had never seen such a soft expression on Itachi's face. His eyes were stinging again, probably because of the strain the dojutsu were putting them under. "You should let it go for now," Fugaku warned in his back. "No need to drain your chakra in vain." He obeyed reluctantly, if only because he was getting tired indeed. The world seemed very dull compared to what he had just experienced, and he was already looking forward to seeing it through the Sharingan again. Later though. "Tell us then, what happened? What triggered it?" Izumi asked. Sasuke blushed again. The Sharingan could be awakened by a strong emotion of any kind, and the stories varied widely from one person to another. He didn't know why he was embarrassed by his, and why he wasn't so keen on sharing it. "Were you fighting?" His mother inquired, noticing his poor state now that she wasn't focused on his eyes. "I was fighting Naruto and I just didn't want to lose. If I lost, he would have stopped training with me though. I just really wanted to win." He could still feel the sensation expanding in his chest, this urgency filling his whole being. He had formulated a wish. And it had been granted. I see, his father said, tone and face indecipherable. Sasuke frowned. He wasn't interested in their opinion of it. Personally, he thought it was not too bad a story. How did he react? His mother asked with no small amount of concern. Sasuke shrugged. He didn't know for sure, and he was a bit scared to find out. It was the only thing putting a damper on his enthusiasm. He didn't want Naruto to fear him. Izumi clapped her hand together, breaking the soured mood and bringing the focus back to her. When should we celebrate then? Izumi, she asked. She was as excited as if she was the one who had activated her Sharingan for the first time. Oh, he had forgotten about that. It was a bit of a tradition to have some sort of celebration to mark the awakening of a Sharingan among the youth, and it was a universally hated affair by said youth. It was embarrassing and boring, and Sasuke would have tried to talk his family out of it if he thought he had any chance of succeeding. He peered at his father, the only one he could hope would temper all the excitement, but was utterly betrayed when all he said was, "I can take a day off at the end of the week." A day off. His father. Perfect. His mother said, "Cheers back. I'll make the announcement. Sasuke, you can invite some friends to the district if you want." He stared at her, the softness of her face when she smiled like this, the creases at the corner of his eyes that he had never noticed before. It was a big deal she was offering, because even if the Uchiha district had never been officially closed off to outsiders, and even if they had been more open these past few months than ever before in Sasuke's life, it was still unheard of for non-Uchiha to just wander in the district, except to conduct official business. Those who could be seen in their streets were longtime friends and teammates, people who had been invited at some point. It was a big deal and he should have been glad. He had to ask though. Can I invite Naruto? It was pointless maybe, because there was a chance Naruto would never want to have anything to do with him anymore. The thought hurt and he resolved not to think about it before he could ask the boy face to face. They all exchanged uncomfortable looks that gave him a weird sense of vindictive satisfaction. He wasn't about to let them forget about him, whether they remained friends or not. It would be unwise, Sasuke, his father eventually answered, as predicted. Then no. He could have invited Sakura, but it didn't feel right if Naruto couldn't be there. She would understand. He would have invited anyone really, their entire class even, if it meant Naruto could come too. They kept making plans without needing much of his input. He let his mind wander, drink it all in. He had the freaking Sharingan. Naruto had run away, again. He was doing that a lot lately, and he couldn't say that he liked it. Even worse, he was hiding now. He would have denied it if confronted, would have said he was just busy or something, but he tried to be honest with himself at least, so to himself he could admit he was plain hiding. He had been skipping the academy for 3 days now, as well as their little training sessions. It was good for his finances at least, he was getting really good at that pickpocket thing. He had ditched side with the lamest excuse possible, but it's not like the boy cared one way or another. Nothing ever fazed him, it was very boring. He kept far away from the academy and tried to tell himself he didn't miss the others. It wasn't working. He wasn't mad anymore, maybe hadn't really been in the first place. Well, he was pissed at Sasuke for sending freaking head of the police force Uchiha Fugaku, his only sort of friend's father who didn't like that they were friends at his door, but he was probably even more pissed that Sasuke had done it on his behalf. His and Sakura's. Why? Why did he care? Naruto had been wrongly punished countless times before. It wasn't supposed to matter. But Sasuke cared, and now his father did too. Naruto really didn't need that kind of complications in his life. He didn't need Sasuke. Didn't need his care and his friendship and his help, he didn't need him at all. He had told himself that if he beat the other boy, he would move on. He would find someone else to train with him, someone who wouldn't want to befriend him, hopefully. So he should have been mad that Sasuke had chosen just that moment to up the ante and pop his clan dojutsu, to jump ahead all of a sudden, leaving Naruto far behind. He should have been mad. Instead, he had been relieved? Maybe he simply didn't want to give up on this. Was it so wrong of him? He hated how that made him feel to be away now, to be on his own. He used to be good at this. He didn't care, before. He had thought seeing the Sharingan on Sasuke's face would maybe be enough of a deterrent, would be the final push that made him walk away. But even if he still shivered just thinking about the red eyes. It was Sasuke. It's not like he was a threat. He didn't mind if it was Sasuke looking at him. Naruto was wandering the streets, not skipping this time, they didn't have class today. He had fought and lost against the urge to go outside and walk, slowly but surely, toward the Uchiha district. It was all those gossips' fault, really. He had heard it mentioned in passing, the Uchiha were celebrating a new Sharingan user in their ranks. It's true that it had to be joyous news for them. Sasuke was probably elated, or as elated as that broody head could be. Naruto was curious about it. Curious at the boy with his family, at the inner working of his clan. Those were all things completely unknown to him. His parents had to be proud. They had to be happy, all of them. Naruto wondered at Sasuke's happy face. He stopped in his track though, as soon as the arch marking the entry of their district came into view. He observed, safely hidden behind a tree, the comings and goings of their clan members, and others too. From here it was hard to confirm there was something noteworthy going on inside, partly because he had never been around that area before and had no idea what it looked like on a regular day. It's not like he could find out, anyway. It's not like he was allowed in there. I can bring Sasuke out here, if you want. Naruto jumped and hit his head hard against the trunk of the tree. Raising his head while rubbing at the upcoming bruise, he saw Uchiha Itachi looking down at him from a high branch, sitting there all casual like it was a common thing to do. I'm just passing by, Naruto retorted, cringing at his lack of conviction. Who would believe such a blatant lie? Still, Itachi said, going with it anyway. He stood up on his branch, ready to do just that. Don't. I think I'll do it. I'll be gone by the time you come back. Naruto always had to wrestle himself into holding that man's gaze. His eyes, he didn't like to have them on him at all. Itachi stared for a long moment before shrugging. Still. In a flurry of leaves, he was gone, leaving Naruto to curse after him. He wasn't there to see Sasuke. He didn't care either way. He stepped out of the tree's shadow, eager to get back home and lock himself in his room for the rest of the year. Sasuke knew that his clan had a reputation for being quite uptight and not much fun. He couldn't deny it without being obtuse, and he couldn't defend it either, because frankly, he was grateful for it.
Especially now. He wouldn't have survived a proper party like he knew some other clans organized for their celebrations. This was mortifying and exhausting enough as it was. It couldn't be called a party by any sense of the term anyway, but it was always done more or less this way. They had taken up residence in their temple's courtyard with food and drinks, and people wandered in and out to offer their congratulations and praise before going about their day or hanging around to catch up with each other. The ones that stayed the longest were kids and teenagers, on the promise of free food. Sasuke didn't have much to do except stand there and bear the attention. The younger kids were watching him with odd and envious expression, and he remembered standing exactly in their place and wondering why the star of the show looked so sullen, when they had just received what they were all wishing for. He knew, now. Who would be happy to stand around all day while half the clan visited them to pinch their cheek and pat their head? The elders were fawning, the adults, bragging. The kids his age oscillated between creepy admiration and open jealousy, and Sasuke just really wanted it to be over. At the end of the day, his father would take him to the temple and put his name in the register of the Sharingan users. He would have a small lecture about the inner working of the dojutsu. He was excited to maybe be entrusted with some secrets only Red Eyes got to hear. He would also get a few lessons in the upcoming days so that he could learn to call up his Sharingan at will. His mother looked happy, at least. It had been a long time since he had seen her this social, chatting away with other women of the clan. Things were still tensed at home, never for the same reason it seemed, but there was always something. Between his mother and father arguing or Itachi feeling bad, it seemed like they couldn't catch a break. His father was discussing probably important things in a corner of the courtyard with some of the clan's higher-ups, but every now and then he looked in Sasuke's direction and his face lost a bit of his harshness. All in all, it wasn't that bad. He popped a dumpling into his mouth, satisfied that the number of visitors was slowly trickling down. Izumi bid him farewell with another hug. She was leaving on a mission that very night. She passed Itachi on her way out and slammed him hard on the back with a grin and some quip he couldn't hear from there. He was always amazed at the ease she could display around his somber brother, whom even adults had a hard time addressing. He had been confused as to why she was so excited for today's ordeal, way more than him, until his mother had reminded him that Izumi's own Sharingan had awakened on the day of the Kyuubi attack, after she had watched her father died. There had been no celebration for her. Itachi marched over to him with the ghost of a smile on his face. Izumi truly was a genius. Thought you'd want to know that Naruto was lurking at the district doors, he said casually once Sasuke was within hearing range. What? Really? The news chased away any lethargy this day had grown into Sasuke's mind. Why was Naruto here? Was it a coincidence? What did he want? Sasuke looked alternatively at his mother and father, biting his lips. He wasn't supposed to leave just yet, but... I'll cover for you, Itachi said around a dango stick. He wasn't looking at Sasuke, and now wasn't the day Sasuke would understand what went through his brother's head. He had already bolted toward the exit. He only stopped running when he came into view of the gate, and crossed the last meters on a more measured, nonchalant stroll, hoping Naruto wouldn't notice he was out of breath and starting to sweat. He looked around casually, trying not to seem too eager. For a moment he saw nothing, and thought that maybe Naruto had left, maybe they had missed each other. Hi Saz. Sasuke squealed. What the? You did it on purpose. He accused. Naruto had come up behind him, and had probably been hiding behind a pillar just for the sake of startling him. And what if I did? He asked all smug, pleased with himself. Sasuke pouted and was about to snap back. Only then did he remember they were still supposed to be fighting. Naruto seemed to recall too, because his face grew more sullen. I was just passing by, he said to his shoes more than to Sasuke. Thought I'd say hello. I didn't congratulate you. For the eyes. Thanks, Sasuke answered, even if he still hadn't. Naruto was digging in the dusty floor with his shoe, hands deep in his short pockets, uncomfortable but still here. Sasuke had to say something.
He opened his mouth even he still didn't know what, but Naruto beat him to it.
Show me.
He was looking straight at Sasuke now, with an intensity that managed to urge him to look away and pine his gaze at the same time.
Show me your eyes.
Seeing how the last times had gone, Sasuke wasn't really on board.
There was no denying Naruto anything though. Sasuke closed his eyes on black. They opened on red.
Naruto's face scrunched up and he squinted, but he didn't close his eyes or look away.
He even took a step forward, scrutinizing.
There was a quality to him Sasuke had seen with no other. The Sharingan couldn't distinguish chakra precisely like the Byakugan did, but it could still see it, in a way, a tinted veil over a person, just a whisper of something hidden.
Naruto's wasn't subtle in any way, he looked brighter like
this, like a beacon, anchoring Sasuke's gaze who couldn't have looked away if he wanted to. And then he couldn't, period, because Naruto had brought his hands up to his face. He rested his fingers under Sasuke's eyes, barely putting pressure but nailing him right there with no hope to escape.
Sasuke could barely breathe.
He had no idea what Naruto was looking for in his eyes. What is it he wanted to see? He hoped he would find it though, find it and like it and not push him away. His blue eyes were deeper like this too, something stirring at the bottom of his gaze, hidden, imprisoned, but still there, still within reach.
Sasuke felt like he could have tumbled right through it.
Naruto stepped back though, taking his hands back with him, and the moment was gone. Sasuke let the Sharingan fall away, and waited, somewhat anxious, for Naruto's verdict. Naruto put his hands back in his pocket, recovered his careless demeanor. It was with professional disinterest that he spoke next.
I guess they're pretty cool.
And Sasuke, who couldn't just go with it, couldn't deal with anything that had happened and anything he was feeling right now, answered with a smirk, I think you mean they're awesome. Somehow it was the right thing to say though. Naruto's face broke into a wide grin and he finally relaxed a smidge, found some of his confidence back.
Sasuke preferred it this way. This was familiar enough.
Of course, this was the moment someone chose to interrupt them and raise all his hackles up again. So, this is where you've been, Sasuke. Thinking about it though, it was better for his mother to arrive now rather than just a few moments ago.
Now that would have been awkward.
I was just saying hello, he muttered.
She couldn't blame him.
They had been the ones to refuse Naruto entry.
It's fine, she dismissed. Naruto, right? I'm Uchiha Makoto, Sasuke's mother. It's nice to meet you.
Caught off guard by being addressed like this, adults usually ignored him. Naruto forgot to be his typical rude self.
Nice to meet you, he grumbled.
We've heard a lot about you, she said.
Naruto tensed up, waiting for a scold, but Sasuke knew what she was going to say, and it was much worse. Worse. Sasuke talks about you all the time.
He hid his face behind his hand, mortified.
Did she have to say that, really?
It's not like he could deny it, not without lying anyway, but still.
Mom. What?
I'm glad you two are friends, that's all. Sasuke looked away from Naruto, convinced that would be the sentence to snap him out of his daze and brought his mean streak back up. Because surely, he wouldn't stand for anyone calling them friends. Instead of denying it though, he let out a small, very small, are you?
That had Sasuke looking back at him.
He was staring at his mother, defiant, challenging her to stand by her words.
Yes. I am.
He assessed her for a long time, trying to decide whether he would believe her or not.
Sasuke found himself holding his breath. All right.
That was all she got before he lost interest in her entirely and turned towards Sasuke, who couldn't decide if he ought to be offended or not, on her behalf or even his.
I'll go now. See you at training. Sasuke was unsettled enough that he didn't catch up immediately. Naruto had already turned away when Sasuke called back, I'll be there. And I'll kick your ass. His mother's scolding was worth Naruto's laugh echoing away.
It had been a very long time since Naruto had wanted to run away. He used to think about it a lot. He had even made a couple of half-hearted attempts.
He would pack a bag thinking he would go camping in the forest for a few days, with the underlying possibility that maybe he would just keep walking, and eventually the village would be far behind him, and he would be free. He'd never been far enough to get the edge of the village in his sight though. There was always a shinobi or another very conveniently getting in his way, asking him what he was doing this far into the woods and that really, he should turn around, for whatever reason. He didn't know if they would really have stopped him. He had never tried to make a real break for it, because he was afraid to find out. He fantasized about it a lot though. He imagined he would walk, until everything was unfamiliar, until no one around could recognize him. Surely there had to be somewhere in this world where he was unknown, where people didn't already have an opinion of him even though he had never met them before. Maybe there would even be people who wouldn't mind befriending him. He tried to picture what those places could look like. Fishing villages by the shore, facing the sea, the long expanse of the desert, a city lost in the jungle, a city covered in snow. He had seen a lot of maps, but he still had trouble wrapping his mind around just how big the world was. Surely, there had to be a point on those maps that was better than here. But Naruto hadn't thought about those little points in a long time. The realization was both unnerving and soothing, in a way. Konoha had never had any appeal to him before. There wasn't a single thing he liked about the place, a single good memory he could place in its streets. No friendly faces, no beloved places. Nothing to tie him here, if not actual ties. Nothing to keep him from leaving. And then, he'd asked Sasuke to be his rival. It was strange and confusing how he couldn't make up his mind about whether he regretted it or not. He didn't like that Sasuke and Sakura had made him forget about why he wanted to get stronger. His goal was to be free. But free from what? Free from this place and those people, but he was trapped now by their friendship too, by how nice it was to stand next to them. Did he want to be free of this? He wanted to be free, but being loved didn't sound so bad either. Was it possible then? For him to find a place here, to be content with his fate? He didn't need to be liked by everyone, he didn't care to have all the friends. One person would be enough. If he could be sure that they wouldn't leave him alone, then it would be worth it, wouldn't it? To give up on freedom. He didn't have the answer. For now, he could only resolve to enjoy this, maybe even try to work for it a little harder. He had pushed and still Sasuke had remained stubbornly determined to stay there right in front of him, never out of sight, impossible to ignore. He still had marks on his face from their fights days after, that made Naruto feel guilty and bad even if Sasuke hadn't blamed him in any way. Naruto always forgot that strangely, people seemed to take much longer than him to heal up from their injuries. He was already as good as new the next day, nothing left but a dull ache in his shoulder where the kunai had struck. Sasuke's lip was still split and his hand bandaged, and still he chased after Naruto, demanded his time and attention. Maybe that meant that he was here to stay. It sure was nice, to exist in someone else's world. He was almost starting to have some hope. He should have known better. He should have known better. Known that it wouldn't last. Known that this wasn't for him. Should have known that there was a reason why he had no right to love. The paper burnt in his hand as soon as he'd finished reading it. Mizuki hissed, annoyed, as he failed to let it go on time. He blew on his fingers as he watched the ashes scatter on the ground. He needed to make his move soon. Lord Orochimaru was getting impatient, and himself was feeling the tide turning on him. Parents starting to ask around, to question their children. He wouldn't be able to hold his position for long. It was for the best, really. He was sick of this place, sick of these brats, sick of playing the nice teacher. One stolen scroll and he would be back in Lord Orochimaru's good grace, allowed to go back to his side. And Mizuki knew just what monster boy to get help from. Chapter 10. Remember that whole mess with Mizuki in canon? Well, this is it. But worse. School had been kind of hellish lately. It wasn't that unusual, except Naruto couldn't figure out what had brought this up.
It sucked because other aspects of his life were going pretty well.
Sakura had gotten over her hesitations towards Sasuke and was now open to interacting with him at school.
By extension, so was Naruto. It had shifted subtly but significantly the dynamic of their class's microcosm. Naruto was left in peace, now that he was in the good grace of both Ino and Sasuke in the eyes of the others.
He had even started to pay more attention in class thanks to Sakura's nagging.
She liked to explain things, blabbering on and on about a subject or another, and it should have been annoying, but it was the only way Naruto had to actually follow what they were being taught. She babbled about the reading material and he discreetly drunk her every word. She was pretty like this, since she forgot to care about people watching. It was nice. Things were fine with Sasuke too, they had even resumed training. That moron had tried to tell him that he would forego the use of his Sharingan if it made Naruto uncomfortable.
What an idiot.
Naruto had no interest in beating him with a disadvantage. It was true it still made him feel kind of queasy, but he just had to remind himself that it was Sasuke, and to avoid eye contact while it was on, which was for the best anyway, since he wasn't keen on falling into one of the Uchiha's famed genjutsu. They had had a brief but heated argument over whether or not genjutsu was a coward move. They had settled on agreeing that there was no such thing, there were only winning or losing moves, but that it was still a bastard move. Apart from that, it was fine, if incredibly frustrating, now that most of his tactics were no longer effective, useless under the red light of the Sharingan. But well, he had to know what he was up against if he was to beat Super Jounin one day, as per their plan. The resolve had made Sasuke laugh.
That was nice too.
So, things should have been good, but the teachers had inexplicably been much more hostile to him in the past few weeks. He would have dismissed it if it was only one of them. Adults taking out their sadness and frustration on him were nothing new, but they were ganging up this time. The only one who escaped the trend was Mizuki, who was even being extra nice and complacent.
It didn't sit well with Naruto either.
Mizuki was probably the worst of them all, and him being good was nothing but suspicious. Once upon a time, he would have just skipped school until things blew off, but now he had to account for Sakura's scolding. He had no idea where that sudden interest in his education came from, but she was taking it very seriously.
And somehow, he didn't like disappointing her. So, he went to school and endured. It didn't help, or maybe it did? That slowly, Sakura, then Sasuke, and even some others like Shikamaru, began to defend him in class.
When he was being sent out for no reason, when he was being wrongly accused in someone else's place, he no longer bore it alone with no support. They didn't stand up outright for him, but they made little remarks, pointed out that he had done nothing wrong. Naruto hated it, both because it was embarrassing and pointless, and because of the warmth that spread through his chest, all the way down to his bones. Still, he was on edge, and so when Mizuki came to find him on his usual spot on the roof one afternoon after class, he was instantly on guard.
"Hello, Naruto. How are you?" Naruto couldn't figure out that man.
He was convinced deep down he was just an asshole who hated children with a passion, so he didn't get why he was a teacher, and why no one else saw that there maybe was a problem with that. Even when he was being all nice and acting concerned, Naruto couldn't help but distrust him.
"Fine," he said curtly. "Things have been tough at school, right?" "I'm sorry about that." "Yeah, right. What do you want?" Mizuki's smile didn't waver, but there was no missing the clenching of his jaw. "I'm just concerned, that's all. I figured I could give you some advice. To help you out." "I don't need your help." It was easy to eat at the man's patience. He must have been more determined than usual though, because he kept on his act. "Seriously though. I noticed you had a hard time with ninjutsu. Wouldn't you want to get your hand on something that could truly help you out?" Naruto refrained from saying that it was supposed to be the man's job. He had pretty much given up on ninjutsu anyway. He was confident now that he would be able to perform the ones required for graduation, so he was much more on board for studying Fuinjutsu, which was easier and cooler and all around better in every aspect. He wasn't about to say that to Mizuki though. "I guess," he said mildly.
He was curious despite himself.
What game was the man playing at?
I could tell you how to get your hand on a scroll. Something that contains a truly good method for people who are struggling, like you.
The offer would have been tempting if Naruto thought he could trust it in any way. Really?
Yes.
You could catch up to the other. You could even get some recognition.
Now that was what definitely broke the deal for him.
If he doubted Mizuku was sincere before then, he was sure now.
Because they both knew that nothing, no amount of power and talent, would ever get him any recognition around here.
Sorry, Mizuki-sensei. You're going to have to raise the stake.
The change was instantaneous, almost scary. Mizuki lost all his fake cheers and plastic smile, and Naruto felt like he was seeing him for the first time as he really was.
What do you want then, brat? Naruto found it kind of refreshing. There's nothing you can give me.
And he wanted nothing from this man. Mizuki smiled then, a mean, self-satisfied smile, that had Naruto recoil slightly, wary.
I think there is. Naruto raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting.
He regretted not standing up when the man had first arrived. Sitting here at the top of the water tank, he felt vulnerable, exposed. If you get me what I want, Mizuki said, with an air of conspiracy, I'll tell you a secret.
Naruto scoffed.
What secret?
Well, your secret.
I'll tell you about your life. I'll tell you why it is that everyone treats you this way. I'll tell you everything. Giving the satisfaction on Mizuki's face, Naruto could only assume the effect of his words were plain visible on his own face. Naruto hated it had this power on him, but Mizuki had struck a chord. It was one of the few things Naruto wanted, to know, at last, the reason behind the village's hatred of him, to know why his life was as it was. It wasn't the first time people came to him with dubious requests like this, convinced for some reasons that he would be on board with whatever shady business they wanted him on. None had ever offered him anything he wanted or needed though. But this.
Go on.
Naruto waited for the streets to empty out, the shops closing for the night and people ushering home to their family. It was the best time of day to wander around Konoha when there was no one else out to bother him. The Hokage Tower would take more time to quiet down, since there were always people coming and going, crises to take care of, messages to relay. The last one to leave was always the Hokage, when he didn't just sleep right there in his office.
Naruto waited for a lull in the area's activity and snuck inside the building. He didn't know if he was still persona non grata, he hadn't entered the tower for years. Better not to be seen though, it was a habit more than anything.
If he wasn't seen or heard, if no one knew he was here, he could move freely.
He could escape the unbearable weight of their attention.
It had been a while, but it was still just as easy going up the floors unnoticed.
There were not many people left to wander the corridors and he knew this building by heart.
He made quick work of reaching the Hokage floor, all the way to the top. The library was situated a few doors down the Hokage's office, with just one shunned to stand guard according to Mizuki, and a seal easy enough to break. Naruto had played dumb when the man had explained briefly what a lock seal was and how to go through it.
He wasn't about to advertise his dabbling into fuinjutsu.
He approached the library door and walked right past it. The Hokage was sitting at his desk, as predicted.
Did he ever get up at all? Maybe he actually lived there.
Maybe he had fused with the chair and could only move by rolling it around.
Hi, old man.
He didn't seem particularly happy to see him, but then again, he never seemed happy about anything. He looked so old, much older than in Naruto's memories, old and weak and useless.
Naruto. To what do I owe your visit? Naruto took his time, building up his effect.
The Jounin standing next to the desk, that he had interrupted in the middle of a mission report, was looking at him with a mix of resentment and wariness. He had small, round sunglasses that made him look very suspicious, even creepy.
Naruto ignored him entirely. I just wanted to inform you that Mizuki-sensei is a criminal and a traitor.
That, at the very least, caught their attention for good.
What are you talking about?
He just tried to bribe me into stealing some forbidden scroll from your library.
The Jounin started to protest, outraged.
The Hokage silenced him with a raised hand.
This is a serious accusation, Naruto. Do you have proof of what you're saying?
The boy rolled his eyes. He knew for sure that, had he brought that same accusation to anyone in his class, any kids at the academy, they would all have said it figures with a shrug. He also knew no one in the higher places cared about them and had any idea just how truly terrible a teacher Mizuki was. So it wasn't surprising, but it was annoying all the same. He talked me through infiltrating the place.
He even gave me this. Naruto pretended like he didn't see the adults flinch when he reached inside his pouch and got 2 pieces of paper out. Seal breakers.
For the door and the protections on the scrolls.
Sunglasses took them for closer examination before nodding once to the Hokage.
The old man made a sound and 3 ninjas with white animal masks appeared in the office, one knee respectfully on the ground.
What is it, Hokage-sama? Find Mizuki. Bring him here. Be warned, he may be dangerous.
The one in the middle, a man with silver hair, nodded once, and they were gone again.
Naruto breathed out a relieved sigh.
He didn't like the masked ninjas, they made him uncomfortable, with their concealed face and the quiet threat they carried with them. Often, he had seen one of them watch him from afar, and he was sure way more often he hadn't seen them, as they left food and clothes in his apartment or simply spied on him. Since the Hokage's gaze had shifted away from him, and since he had started trapping his door and windows against intruders, he didn't see them so often. He still knew to be wary of them. They were no ordinary shinobi, for ordinary shinobi had no use for covering their face. More than not knowing their identity, what was most unsettling was not being able to read their face.
Did those people even have feelings? It was impossible to tell. Another Jounin entered the room, a young man with a bandana and a senbon between his teeth.
He had a casual, unhurried demeanor, despite walking fast enough that he missed Naruto entirely.
Hokage-sama, what is happening?
We heard. That very second, one of the masked shinobi from earlier, a woman with purple hair, popped back into the room through the open window.
Mizuki resisted arrest. He's on the run.
The Hokage, still sitting at his desk, still motionless, hands crossed in front of his face, took a short moment of reflection before addressing the senbon guy. Ganma, pass the message to all available Jounin and Chunin. Tono Mizuki is suspected of theft and treason, and is currently on the run.
All efforts must be directed into catching him. Go.
The man's eyes caught on Naruto's while he was exiting the desk. He faltered, just barely, but didn't stop, and was soon gone, as well as the masked woman.
As for you, Naruto, the old man said, you're dismissed.
We'll sort this through.
Go home. What? He exclaimed.
He marched on to the desk and slammed his hands on the wood, displacing some papers.
I want to be part of it. That bastard. Go home.
The Hokage thundered without moving a muscle. Out of the corner of his eye Naruto saw sunglasses tense up ever so slightly.
TSK. Whatever.
He made a show of storming out of the office with a flurry and took a few steps in the corridor, to make sure he was out of view, before producing what he had snatched from the desk. Was he that good a thief, or were they just bad observers? He didn't know which one would please him the most. He had taken back the seals given by Mizuki. The tower wasn't quiet in any way now, shinobi running the corridors in a hurry, passing messages and reporting on the tracking of the academy teacher.
Naruto didn't care about that though. Mizuki was already out of his mind.
He had been tempted by the offer.
Really tempted.
But he had decided just a few weeks ago to try to move forward in that village, despite everything. He had no use for the knowledge of the village's hatred anymore. He was sure it was something stupid. People hated each other for the pettiest things. His leading theory was he was bearing the crimes of his parents, who had probably been traitors or even foreign enemies. After all, no one in the village bore the Uzumaki name, and no one looked like him in any way either.
It didn't matter now. Sasuke and Sakura didn't care about that. So he wouldn't either. However, the opportunity was just too good to pass up.
Everyone was busy, and even the chunin guarding the library had deserted their station to go after Mizuki. One seal to put over the one laid across the door, and he could sneak inside. One seal to neutralize the alarm guarding the row of dusty shelves covered in scrolls and books, and he could pick up whichever he wanted. It was just too easy. The man had given him clear instruction as to what scroll to take, but as Naruto set to find it, it occurred to him that he didn't need that one in particular. It was supposed to be full of powerful ninjutsus, but Naruto sucked at ninjutsu, he hated it, and he didn't see that changing anytime soon, scroll or not. But really, what definitely made up his mind was his eyes catching on a familiar red spiral, decorating a big scroll propped up against a shelf in a corner of the room. Naruto approached it carefully, aware that some of those things could contain dangerous and volatile jutsus. He took the scroll with some difficulties, it was the size of one of his legs. The red spiral was painted at each extremity and on the sealing tag that closed the paper. And under it, hand-painted in wide, bold strokes, was some of the only kanjis he could decipher.
The ones that spelled out Fuinjutsu.
There were noises and voices outside.
He strapped the scroll to his back and put his hoodie back above it, before taking back the breaking seals and sneaking out of the room. The scroll was better than anything he could have hoped for. He couldn't read the instructions, but once again, it didn't matter much.
The seals were easy to identify and he could speculate from there with the drawings and symbols written all over the paper. He was grateful for whoever had designed those scrolls and decided that the person learning from it had to be able to follow its instructions even without any reading abilities. The red spiral was drawn everywhere in the scroll, in the corners, between seals, in the decorative borders. He didn't know what it meant. It had been tapped to his door for as long as he could remember, and he had decided to make it his own long before discovering it was actually stitched to every ninja uniform in the village.
No matter.
The sign was his, and they were the ones borrowing it.
Did anyone else had it on their door? No.
Proof. He had found himself a quiet corner of the forest to escape the frenzy of the search for Mizuki. How hard was it for the whole of the shinobi force to catch a single academy teacher?
It didn't concern him anyway.
He was focused on the first seal of the scroll. From what he understood, it was an offensive seal, to be laid on the chest of an opponent during a fight, if he interpreted correctly the little drawings at the bottom. He didn't recognize any of the symbols associated with chakra sealing, like on his other scroll, it had to be something else.
Or not. He felt though that it wasn't harmless in any way. Maybe it was a good thing he didn't have anyone to test it on.
Firing a seal directly from his palm was different from activating one drawn on paper, but he had several hours in front of him and nothing better to do. The heart of it was the same, anyway. It's just that the circle wasn't explicit like on paper. It was formed by his 5 fingers that he spent a long time wriggling around, trying to get them to crook in the right shape. Firing the seal wasn't hard. Like the other and unlike ninjutsu, he didn't need refined control of the quantity, just a general direction.
The hardest part was the timing.
If precision wasn't needed in the flow of chakra, it was essential in all the other aspects of sealing, be it the painted symbols or the position of his hand. He could feel the seal taking form despite having to lay at a tree. There was no sign indicating that it worked in any way, but he knew he was getting close. The ruffling of leaves interrupted his practice. He fell quiet and motionless, all his senses on high alert.
Someone was coming.
He hastily rolled the scroll and strapped it to his back, but thought better of it.
He had been practicing the storing seal shinobi used to conceal weapons and other objects in scrolls, and he found it very handy.
He got a small scroll from his pouch and unrolled it past the traditional storing spot for kunais and shuriken, until he found a blank one. The person, whoever it was getting closer.
In closing,
the stolen Fuinjutsu lesson disappeared in a puff of smoke. Naruto put the storing scroll back into his pouch and sat at the foot of the nearest tree, intent on looking as innocent as possible to what was probably one of the shinobi out on the manhunt checking out the area. He wasn't so far off, he realized when the person in question landed in a branch above his head. They were part of the manhunt indeed. The very man hunted. Hello there, Mizuki-sensei. Naruto regretted deeply having sat down in such a vulnerable position. You sold me out, you rat. The man looked exhausted and out of his mind with rage. Naruto almost expected foam to start bubbling at the corner of his mouth. He got up casually and took a few steps away, ears straining to hear the man's movement. I wouldn't say sold. I got nothing in return. Alright, maybe provoking the Chunin that was already after his blood wasn't the smartest move. Mizuki let out a piercing cry of rage, so much for being discreet, and lunged himself at Naruto, who jumped back on impulse. A good impulse, because Mizuki had two kunais out, and the look in his eyes made Naruto shiver. He wasn't really out for his blood though. Was he? I can't believe you went to the Hokage, you fucking brat. I'm going to fucking murder you. You should have raised up the stake. Naruto yelled back before dunking into the trees. He had to escape that crazy bastard. It was sort of a chance that half the village was already after him, surely someone would stumble upon them. Maybe Naruto would even be congratulated for his capture or something. Isn't it what you wanted? Knowing where it comes from, their hatred for you? Knowing why your life has always been so miserable? Mizuki sounded focused enough despite his anger. Maybe making others suffer was therapeutic for him. Naruto clenched his teeth and regretted running around the trees meant he couldn't plug his ear shut. It was the first time he heard it acknowledged so bluntly. The very few times he had tried to broach the subject with the Hokage or another teacher, his concerns had been quickly dismissed, and he had been made to believe that he was imagining all this. Playing martyr. What would it change? I don't care. If people are assholes. But they're not, Naruto. Do you think that's it? That they're just mean and you're a victim? Tell me, monster boy, didn't it ever occur to you that they had a very good reason indeed? Naruto stopped in the next clearing and Mizuki didn't come closer. He was up on a branch, looking down at Naruto, delight obvious on his face. What a sick bastard. Naruto had heard it before. Monster boy. Beast. Abomination. But it was just things people said. It didn't mean anything. Fuck you, he said weakly. Mizuki's features softened. He crouched on his branch like he was bored suddenly. You know, I really was going to be honest about it with you. And to let you peek into that scroll too. Why on earth would you turn that down? I don't fret with traitors, Naruto spat out. Mizuki's eyes widened for a second, before he burst out into an ugly laugh. What, is that what this is about? Loyalty to the village? What has that village ever done for you, monster boy, that you would have the urge to defend it? Naruto stayed silent. He wasn't about to spill his inner struggle to that man, but it wasn't about the village, not really. It was maybe about loyalty though. He had no interest in helping people who would turn against their own, break their promises. Loyalty was important, no? Be it to the village or something else. A person, an idea. A purpose. A dream. Was Mizuki loyal to something too? Who knew? And maybe it was also about people seeking help from children, disregarding the consequences it would bring upon their head. About seeking his help, and being convinced it would be granted. Why? Mizuki hated him, and it was mutual. He could have asked anyone else. Well, maybe not anyone, but any other no-name kids from the academy, desperate for attention and recognition, and one that didn't despise him so openly. So why? Why did you ask me anyway? Naruto asked, curious despite himself, despite not really wanting to know the answer.
Mizuki laughed again. I figured the monster boy wouldn't refuse such an opportunity. Stop calling me that. What, monster boy? But it's... Stop it. It's only the truth though. He had to leave. Now. Where was everybody? What were those garbage jounins doing? Why hadn't they caught up to them already? He wanted to leave this place. He didn't want to hear anything. He didn't want to know. With any brain faculty left, he would have known it was a stupid idea to turn his back to his opponent to run away. As it was, it only occurred to him when a kunai pierced his hoodie and shirt and embedded itself under his shoulder blade. He cried out and stumbled, but he didn't stop. He wasn't running fast enough though. Not fast enough to escape that voice. Tell me, Naruto, how do you think it's possible to kill a tailed beast? Naruto almost tripped, caught off guard by the sudden change in topic. Answer, it's not. It can't be killed, not by men anyway. The only way to stop it is to seal it, you see. But not seal it into an object or a scroll, no, that would be a waste, wouldn't it? Such power, it has to be available at some point, even if it's so very hard to control. So, it's better to seal it into a human. Shut up, he pleaded silently. Shut up, I don't want to know, I don't want to know. And newborns are the best because they don't have a will to oppose the invasion of the beast. An adult would fight against it, even unconsciously. But a child. Mizuki jumped from his branch straight on Naruto, his 2 feet colliding painfully with his back. Naruto met the harsh ground with brutal force, putting in extremis his hands in front of his face to avoid breaking his nose and all his teeth on some rocks. Dizzy from the shock, he still managed to take advantage of Mizuki losing his balance to turn on his back. The man was already on him though. Tell me, Naruto. Don't you know anyone that happened to be a newborn on the night Kyuubi was defeated? Naruto screamed. Mizuki laughed. He had a knee pressed on Naruto's chest to keep him from getting up. He straightened up, kunai high in hand, ready to strike. Naruto, mind running in overdrive and seized with panic, grappled at the first thing he could think of. The last thing he had learned. The seal came easily to his hand. He could barely move, but he could move enough that, when Mizuki struck down, he could slam his palm against the man's heart. Naruto cried out again. His attack had shifted the angle slightly and Mizuki's kunai had missed his own heart, but it still plunged deep into his shoulder. Mizuki straightened back up, ready to strike again, to finish him off. But he didn't. He had left his kunai where it was to grip at his chest, above his heart. He choked on a breath, eyes wide with panic. You bastard, what did you? He collapsed on top of Naruto, trying to bring a hand around his throat, in vain. It was over in only a few seconds. His body went limp, his face froze in a horrible grimace of pain and shock. For a long moment, nothing moved, no sound was heard. Naruto stayed frozen in place, barely breathing, indifferent to his pain, to the steady flow of his blood, to everything other than the weight pinning him down. Mizuki was dead. Contrary to what everyone, his teachers, believed, Naruto was a fast learner. He was a fast learner when he was actually taught something. As a result, he was self-taught in most of the areas of his life. There was one thing in particular, that he had learned late in life, but very quickly. Up until the first few weeks of his academy days, Naruto had solely his own experience to rely on when it came to illnesses and injuries. Meaning, illnesses weren't a thing, except after eating food gone bad, and injuries, no matter which, were a minor inconvenience most of the time. He had been patching himself up forever. He had once tumbled down a rocky patch in the forest and scrapped his legs enough that the bone was showing, but he had just bandaged it and it was fine after a few days. Same one another time when he had missed a branch and crashed on the ground. After carefully putting out the piece of wood sticking out of his side, it had healed in no time. Naruto thought it was just how things went.
So, he had been very confused when, during their first ever throwing practice, he had accidentally planted a shuriken deep in Hyuga Hinata's arm thanks to his terrible aim, and she had immediately started bawling while everyone around them stopped dead in their track and the teachers started fussing hysterically. She had been excused from school that day and the next, and she had sported a thick bandage on her arm for an entire month. An entire freaking month. Naruto had been yelled out by the teacher and someone he assumed was from the girls' clan, same eyes, and he had understood that it was serious. He had kept a close eye on his classmates from then on, and he had learned his lesson. He had discovered it was yet another thing that set him apart from the rest of them. They were brought down by the smallest of injuries. They were sensitive to pain and wary of damaging their body. They needed weeks to heal from things he didn't need to concern himself with for more than a few days. They were horrified when things like embedded kunais and broken limbs happened, and he had taught himself to follow their lead, to pace himself on their absurdly weak bodies. It was one little thing he could control, so that he didn't stick out even more. Not that it had helped all that much. When they had started sparring with Sasuke, he was constantly on the lookout for an incident of the sort. There were blows he knew Sasuke wouldn't just bounce from, things that would put him out of commission when Naruto would just walk it off. He'd learned on his own, like everything else. Learned that it would freak people out if they saw him walk with open wounds and bleed all over his clothes. Learned that things he could endure would kill anyone else. Learned to hide it. So the first thing he did, once he had recovered some parity of calm, once he had crawled from under Mizuki's lifeless body, was to rip the kunai out of his shoulder, and bandaged his wounds. He took off his sleeveless hoodie and tied it around his waist, in a way that would hide most of the bloodstains. It was already the color of blood anyway. All the blood was his own, except from one tiny little stain where Mizuki had coughed it out before dying. Naruto had never really thought about the practicality of the color before. He just liked it. All his clothes were like that. Blood red, bright red. Or black. Neither happy nor sad, neither bold nor bland. Sometimes he actually forgot about the bloodstains. He often got injured. He wasn't careful enough to protect his own body. He had never learned that one, since the wounds closed easily, and since he didn't care for the pain. He bandaged his wounds, mechanically, without looking at the lifeless corpse, avoiding its unseeing eyes, its distorted mouth. Of course, it's only then that someone did find them. Naruto. He raised his eyes to the newcomer. It was the Senbon guy. He recognized him from earlier, from the Hokage's office, but he didn't otherwise know him. Why were they always addressing him as if they knew him? Even if they did, couldn't they at least pretend? He'd heard the old man call him Ganma, but that wasn't a reason for him to start addressing him with it, right? Couldn't they at least pretend not to know who he was? What he was? Oh hell. Oh hell. What happened? Are you alright? I'm fine. Another shinobi arrived a second later, a strict-looking man with an impressive scar running from the bridge of his nose and spreading onto his cheek like roots. He went directly to the motionless form of Mizuki still lying on the ground. He's dead, he said in a breath, both incredulous and already accusing. Yeah, no shit. What happened? Naruto focused on the Senbon one, who looked less angry than the other. There was no doubt in his mind that the next word that would come out of his mouth would be a lie though. Even if he hadn't been desperate to hide the secret of the ceiling he had stolen and learned, even if it had been something else. In other circumstances, maybe he would have told them. He had only defended himself after all. The man was a known criminal and death would have been his punishment anyway. Killing an enemy, a traitor, was nothing uncommon for them shinobi. But Naruto wasn't a shinobi, wasn't he? He wasn't an aspiring one either. He wasn't even a child. He wasn't human. Maybe he would have told them, had he not just realized why it was that he was always punished so much harsher than the others, why he couldn't get away with things everybody else did. Would they believe it was self-defense? From him? From the monster? He was feeling sick.
I don't know. He just collapsed. He wondered if the seal would leave any mark.
If it was well thought out, he guessed not. Looks like a heart attack, the other man said, still skeptical.
Naruto avoided both their gaze. Did he attack you? A shrug. Are you hurt? Another shrug. Naruto. Stop saying my name.
He didn't need to look at the man to picture the surprise on his face.
We've never met before. Stop saying it.
Why didn't he just call him Monster Boy to be done with it? Or that other one that he had never truly registered because it was the one that made the less sense, that he thought was the least attached to him.
Demon Fox. Ha! Let's go back to the Hokage Tower, the Sanban man said. His partner hauled up Mizuki's body on his back.
Naruto almost expected him to move again, to come back. He'd never realized death was so finale.
So brutal. Here 1 second, gone the next. Gone by his hand. He wondered what he was supposed to feel.
I don't suppose you'll let me go home, he mumbled without conviction, without any venom. He was so tired all of the sudden.
He wanted to sleep. Sleep, and not wake up.
You're coming with us, Sanban said as an answer. Naruto wanted to believe he at least looked apologetic about it, but it was probably just wishful thinking. One of their teachers, he didn't remember which one, had come into the classroom one morning looking sullen and gloomy, and he had announced bluntly that one of their classmates had died.
A freak accident, or maybe she was sick. He didn't recall.
He didn't even know her name, they had never talked and he didn't care much. The class had been shaken though, and even he had felt a little bad about it, because it was just weird. Kids weren't supposed to die, right?
Death was for the old ones. He remembered distinctly though that the very first reaction of most of them had been disbelief.
Several kids had chuckled nervously, urged their teacher not to joke like that. It had taken a few minutes for the truth to really set in, for him to convince them that he wasn't joking in the slightest. Naruto had found it strange. How in hell would a teacher lie about something like this? And still, there had been a girl who was very close to the one who had died, and who had refused to believe it. She had simply refused. The truth didn't hold a candle to what she wanted to believe, to what she desperately wishes to be true. Despite all evidence, she had kept that up for days. Naruto was in the Hokage's office and he wondered if the Hokage knew about that girl and her friend.
About not wanting to see the truth, no matter the proofs, no matter what. Then again, he certainly did. Naruto had heard lots about Danzo after all. That's why he decided he would ask. He could stay silent if he wanted to. He could deny everything and go back to his life. He could make up his own truth. But what was the point in that?
The girl had broken down, eventually.
Danzo had been found out and the Hokage was in disgrace, even if they were pretending he wasn't. The truth always came out, eventually. There were other people in the room. The Sanban guy and his teammate. Sunglasses. Sasuke's father. Shikamaru's too. And wasn't that a Hyuga?
So, you say he just collapsed?
You didn't see anything else.
I was trying not to get impaled.
Sorry if I didn't pay much attention to the rest. What did they hope he would say?
That he had ripped out his heart in cold blood or something?
Why did it matter anyway? The traitor was dead. End of story. At least it looked like they hadn't noticed about the missing scroll. Naruto didn't want to think about it.
About what would have happened, had he tried that seal on anyone else. About how he still wanted to learn in spite of it. The Hokage stayed silent like he always did, for an absurd long time that made everyone ill at ease and restless.
Very well. You can go then.
The other adults had stayed quiet, but it was obvious they weren't mere observers.
They could have objected if they wanted to. They didn't. He was free to go. free to run back and not ask. But what was the point in that? Old man. What?
It was hard to remember that the man had looked at him somehow fondly once upon a time. Naruto had thought maybe he had one ally in him, but the Hokage had quickly lost interest in his fate. His eyes were cold now, cold and tired, dead already.
Mizuki said something to me. Huh? What was it?
The other's attention sharpened. But Naruto stayed focused on the man. If he didn't want to give him a straight answer, Naruto would have to read it on his face, in his eyes.
He inhaled deeply. No turning back. Is it true that I'm the demon fox? He instantly got his answer. He didn't pay attention from them on. Not to those who protested, not to their air of quiet shock. He saw without seeing it the pained expression of the old man. Why?
Naruto was the one in pain.
Or was he? What was the point of being a monster if he couldn't escape hurting? So that was it. That was the answer. He was a demon.
He had killed hundreds of people in the village 10 years ago. And he could still kill more.
Hadn't he just done that? Was that where this power was coming from, the ceiling? He was a monster.
All those years, they had hated him, and they had been right. He had promised himself he would stop running away, but really, right now there was nothing else he could do.
He could lose Jounin in the streets of Konoha.
He had done it before. He took full advantage of the small respite he got where everyone in the room stayed stupidly frozen, before they realized what was happening.
Second manhunt of the day. But he wasn't as stupid as Mizuki. He just had to run away. He had to run away from this place.
He had never realized how much he still hoped to find his own peace here, to carve a corner for himself. He thought they would forget about him eventually, forget about what crimes had been put on his head before he was even born.
It would have passed eventually. He would have found his place. He would have been happy here. He still had hope. He had been so stupid. He had to leave right now. To get far away from here. What if he could really be dangerous still? What if the beast was let loose? He didn't want to hurt anyone. He didn't want to kill. What if Sasuke found out? What if they fought someday and Naruto slipped? What if Sasuke knew? What if he was hurt? What if he lost control in class and killed another kid? Why had they never told him about it, told him that he was a danger to be around? But hadn't they?
He'd been told time and time again that he wasn't to befriend anyone, that he couldn't be loved. He should have listened.
They had been right all along. He had to leave, now.
Leave this place and found a hole in the ground he could crawl up and die, because it was over. There was no hope for him anymore. He would never be home here, he would never be home anywhere.
He would never be loved. How could he face Sasuke and Sakura again, now that he knew what he knew?
They would have never have befriended him, had they known. They would have stayed away like their parents had told them to.
He had to leave and not come back.
Leave and be free of this mess. Free of the pain he could cause and the pain that could be caused to him.
Wouldn't it be a blessing to be alone out there? To hide forever, away from everything? Maybe he would stop thinking.
Maybe he would truly become a beast and stop thinking, stop feeling. Naruto ran and ran, deeper and deeper into the forest, barely looking where he was going, indifferent to the branches tearing at his clothes and skin, his feet bumping harshly on the uneven ground. His lungs were burning, his wounds screaming.
He didn't stop. He wouldn't stop. Not until he was in an entirely different world. Not until he was someone else.
Or maybe just until a tree branch grew in his path and tripped him to the ground. Caught up in the momentum, he rolled around for several meters, rocks and sticks digging at his skin. His mind was in shambles, he couldn't register what had just happened. Had that tree grown just right then?
Was that even possible? Only then did he notice them. 2 for now, but more would come. Masked. One had silver hair, he had seen him earlier. The other, unknown. When he signed some more mudras, another branch sprouted out of nowhere, right in Naruto's direction. He jumped purely on instinct. Naruto, calm down. Silver Hair urged. His mask was painted with a dog face, hiding his expression. It was impossible to know if he really felt the urgency that could be heard in his voice. Not that Naruto cared. Let me go, let me go. He screamed, hysterical, as the branches wrapped around his arms. He trashed and kicked and only managed to make them tighter, tight enough to be painful. He wasn't about to stop though. Let me go. We can't do that, Naruto, please. I don't want to stay here. Let me go. Was he crying? It felt like he was, but he couldn't be sure. He heard more than felt something break in one of his arms. The other man, the one with a CA mask who could grow the trees, let out a distressed groan and the grip weakened just a smidge. Naruto, you'll hurt yourself. I don't care. Naruto. Stop saying my name. He wasn't Naruto. He wasn't anyone. He wasn't even there. Where was he? Where was he? It was dark and damp. It smelled terrible. I want to break free, it said. Me too, me too. I want to break free. Me too, me too. For 1, maybe 2 exhilarating seconds, Naruto burst out with power. He was flooded with chakra that was foreign to him, bright red and burning, setting fire to his vein and to his whole mind. He didn't care. It was power. Strong enough to break, strong enough to fight. Strong enough to break free. For 1, maybe 2 exhilarating seconds, Naruto hoped. And then a paper seal was slapped to his forehead, and all was dark. Ironic, it said. But not very funny. Naruto opened his eyes. Or well, he tried to. His eyelids were as heavy as lead. His whole body hurt. Not just muscles from harsh training or a strain from injury, but a bone-deep pain all throughout his body, pinning him to the ground as surely as if he'd been in chains. He tried to move. He heard something rattled. Oh. It wasn't the pain. He managed to sit up. He managed to open his eyes and for a second, he panicked because he couldn't see a thing, but it was just dark. There was a single candle burning in a corner somewhere. He couldn't see much, but he could see enough. The heavy metal circling his wrists and ankles, enough. The chain attached to it, crawling on the ground to their anchor in the raw stone wall, enough. And the bars cutting through the air, setting him apart from the rest of the world, enough. Caged. Naruto screamed. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction. Looking forward to having you on board again.